Jesus was not born in a stable because the inn was full. Hey everyone, my name's Adam Smith. I serve as an ordained minister of Word and Sacrament, and I have a heart for exploring difficult questions and misconceptions about faith and the Bible, and particularly in how they relate in the world today. And as much as I love the nativity story, and as much as I love all the beautiful creche sets and nativity sets that are on display this time of year, they're simply not accurate. Now, before I jump in and start talking about why, please know that I'm not going to be arguing about the historicity of the birth narrative from Luke's gospel. Because, don't get me wrong, I think it's important, but I think that's a whole nother video. So we're going to be tackling the story as it reads, as if it is historical. So, first off, Luke's gospel never mentions that the Roman census would require residents to return to their ancestral towns of origin. This is something that we've read into the text, even though it's not clear in the original Greek. All were to be registered, and the Greek actually there reads hekastos ein tein heauto polin, which literally says each to the of themselves town, or in other words, each to their own town, most likely alluding to the towns where they primarily resided. Rome would not have been interested in ancestral towns for the purpose of their census. They're interested in control and taxation and allocating resources to maintain the integrity and security of the empire itself. So having people go to the ancestral places of their origin for the purpose of their census just doesn't make any sense. And since we don't really have any archaeological evidence that Rome ever conducted any census in this way, it seems that this probably is not the case. It's more likely that Joseph and his betrothed Mary would be going to Joseph's family's home in Bethlehem to stay there with his family. And this tends to make more sense as we jump into the verses that follow. When it came time for Mary to give birth, I think many of us often assumed that this happened at the very tail end of their journey. Just upon arrival in Bethlehem, she began to have contractions, right? And they couldn't find a place to stay. We've seen it portrayed this way. And we've made this assumption primarily because of, I think, a mistranslation of the Greek term kataluma, which historically has been translated as inn. In other words, many translations will say there was no room for them in the inn. But the term kataluma can be translated many different ways. Guest room is one, guest house or accommodation, or perhaps the most generic translation might be as a place to stay. And by the way, this is the same word that Jesus uses later on to refer to a guest room when he talked about the space that he and his disciples used for the Last Supper. So this isn't the only place that this term is used. So if Joseph had gone home to Bethlehem, then he would have gone home to his family's house, most likely. And these houses, these typical village houses would have had a main room with two sections in it, with different elevations, in fact. The animals would have been in the lower section and would have been down here, and on the upper section would have been where the family slept, in their sleeping area. And then right in the middle between both would have been where there is a manger in between. And these houses would sometimes also have a small separate room, either on the side of the house, or it could be the roof up here. There would be a small room for accommodating guests or family members or visitors to show hospitality to folks. So it's more than likely that the house that Joseph and Mary were in was Joseph's family's house, maybe even the one he grew up in. After all, they would have needed family support for when Mary went into labor. It's not like they went into this because they had to with no support down the road. So they were probably staying in that small guest room, Mary and Joseph together. And if that's true, then this also means that at some point after they arrived in Bethlehem and before Jesus was born, Joseph and Mary would have finalized and consummated their marriage, since they were now sharing a room together. Because otherwise, Joseph would be down sleeping in the main room with others and not sleeping in the same room as Mary. So finally, it comes time for Mary to give birth. And there would have been no room in this small little guest room that they were staying in. And besides not having enough room for that, there wouldn't have been enough room for the family members and the midwives to help in the birth process. And they're going to take extra care in this. Everybody knows in this day and age, this is dangerous, right? Giving childbirth is where things can happen, and you want as much help and resources as you can. So this small guest room wasn't big enough. So more than likely, where the birth would have happened would have been in the main room, where conveniently, after everything's over, Jesus could be laid in a manger. So I think a better translation of verse 7 might be, "And she gave birth to her firstborn son, and wrapped him in bands of cloth, and laid him in a manger, because they had no room in the guest room." That's right. So, there was no inn, there would be no innkeeper, and there would be no stable. Does that ruin it for you? Well, what happens after that? Well, then it seems that after the birth, Joseph, Mary, and Jesus stayed at least another 40 days in Bethlehem until they eventually moved to Nazareth to make their home together, probably out where Mary's family is. So, does this change anything? Does this change what we assume to be the author's rhetorical purposes for the birth narrative? Probably not. But what might it mean for us to think about Jesus coming into the middle of the world, into the middle of a loving family, beyond just his mom and dad? That others were there to tend to Joseph and Mary and Jesus in their time of need. Perhaps this story may just remind us to tend to the needs of our own families. But that's not just our nuclear families, not as Christians, but to tend to the whole of the human family as we live into the promises of Christmas. Till next time, my friends.